Rain hammered the windows of Hudson and Sons Diner as if the storm were trying to break in from the darkening streets of Tribeca, and every seat inside was filled with customers who wanted warmth, food, and the comfort of watching someone else fall apart on the glowing television mounted above the counter, where the news anchor was breathlessly recounting every rumor about the tech billionaire Cole Harrington, who had once been hailed as the brightest mind in artificial intelligence before the scandal erupted like lightning across the city's sky. And now the entire diner watched his downfall with a kind of hungry fascination, unaware that the man in question was fighting his way through the storm outside. When the diner door burst open, no one looked up at first because the wind often did that on storm nights, but then a soaked figure stepped inside and the room fell silent, as if a single breath had been stolen from every chest all at once because they recognized him, even drenched and shivering. Cole Harrington. 24 hours ago, worth billions. Now treated like a walking headline, looked so different from his glossy magazine covers that Elena Rivera almost did not register who he was until a customer at table 7 lifted his phone and whispered loudly enough for half the diner to hear. "Is that him? The con man billionaire? The fraud? The liar?" And then the phones rose like a wave ready to capture the moment. Cole stood just beyond the doorway, trembling slightly, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, his coat dripping onto the diner floor, and his eyes distant, unfocused, as though he had been walking for miles without really seeing where he was going, but still aware enough to flinch when the first customer said, "We don't want trouble here." "Don't want." The diner owner, a stout man with a nervous glance toward the television, said, "Sir, you need to leave. This is not the place for your kind of attention." But the storm outside roared in reply, and Cole whispered something no one heard, though his lips moved with the exhaustion of someone whose world had been ripped apart too fast for his body to catch up. A man sitting at the counter approached Cole and grabbed the soaked fabric of his sleeve, saying, "Come on, billionaire." You heard him leave before you drag your mess into our night, and the gesture was not violent but humiliating enough that the entire diner leaned forward, eager to witness the fall. Elena Rivera, who had been balancing a tray of dishes, felt her chest tighten in a way she could not explain because she had seen people embarrassed before, but something about watching it happen to someone who looked like he had already been broken by the world made her body move, before her mind fully understood what she was doing. She set the tray down, stepped out from behind the counter, and crossed the diner floor with the confidence of someone who had lived too many days blending into the background to tolerate cruelty right in front of her. And when she reached Cole, she placed herself between him and the man pulling at his arm. The movement was small, but decisive, and the entire room froze because no one had expected the 24-year-old waitress in her faded uniform and tired sneakers to intervene. Cole lifted his eyes toward her, and in that brief moment their gazes locked, and Elena felt something jolt inside her, a mixture of alarm, empathy, and something she could not yet name because his eyes were not the eyes of a powerful billionaire, but of someone who was desperately trying not to fall apart in front of strangers. The customer holding his sleeve scoffed and said, "What are you doing, kid? Move aside. This guy deserves what he gets." But Elena shook her head and kept her voice low, steady, and sharp enough to cut through the murmurs rising behind her as she said, "If the world turned its back on him, I will not." The words slipped out before she even realized she had spoken them aloud, but once they left her mouth she knew she meant them because she had seen that look before in the people who had nowhere else to go, including herself on nights when the world felt too heavy. The diner went completely silent. No forks clinking against plates, no murmurs, no whispers. Only the steady sound of rain pounding the roof as if the storm itself paused to listen. Cole blinked slowly, staring at her as if unsure whether she was real, and Elena felt the heat of dozens of eyes slicing into her because waitresses were supposed to serve food. Smile politely and stay quiet, not stand between a billionaire and a room full of people eager to watch him fall. The owner muttered, "Elena, what are you doing?" But she did not look away from Cole, who whispered almost silently, "Why?" And she sensed the weight inside that single word, the disbelief, the confusion, and the quiet plea. She answered only with a small nod, barely perceptible but enough for him to steady his breath while the man at the counter hesitated, then stepped back, glaring at Elena as he muttered, "Whatever suit yourself," and returned to his seat. Even then, the tension in the room clung to every surface heavy and electric because no one had expected kindness to interrupt their entertainment, and Elena knew this moment would change something not just for Cole but for her too, though she had no words yet for what that meant. Rain drummed harder against the windows, and the storm outside seemed suddenly smaller than the storm inside the diner as Cole swayed slightly and Elena reached out instinctively, steadying him with a gentle touch on his arm. Warm, surprising grounding. The entire diner watched, but for a breath it felt like the world narrowed to only two people, a broken billionaire and the poor waitress who refused to let him stand alone. Elena guided Cole toward a small booth tucked in the corner of the diner, where the rain sounded softer and the stairs felt a little farther away, though she could still feel every pair of eyes tracking her movements, as if she had broken an unspoken rule by treating him like a human being instead of a headline. She placed a steaming cup of hot water in front of him, because she knew from experience that warmth was the first thing people needed when life had stripped everything else away. Cole stared at the cup for a long moment as if unsure what to do with something so simple. Then his fingers reached for it, hesitating halfway until Elena gently steadied it with her hand, and for the briefest second their fingers almost touched, sending an unexpected spark up her arm. She withdrew quickly, feeling heat gather at the back of her neck while Cole murmured, "Thank you," in a voice that sounded like it had been unused for hours, days, maybe even weeks, and she realized he was trembling not from the cold, but from exhaustion. She could not remember the last time she had seen someone look so lost while trying so desperately not to appear weak. The customers resumed their whispers, throwing glances sharp enough to cut skin, and Elena sensed the shift in the air, the disapproval, the judgment, the unspoken question of who she thought she was to involve herself in the downfall of a billionaire. Cole noticed it too, and his expression tightened with guilt as he whispered, "I did not mean to bring chaos into your life." Elena shook her head and offered a thin, tired smile, the kind she had learned to give when life kept pressing down on her, but she refused to break. "You looked like someone who needed a moment of kindness," she said quietly, surprising herself with how true it felt because she had spent too many nights wishing someone would offer her the same when the world seemed intent on reminding her of her insignificance. Cole looked at her, then really looked at her, and something softened in his gaze as if he were seeing past the uniform, the exhaustion, the walls she kept so carefully built. His gratitude was not loud, but it was deep, and it flickered in his eyes like a small, fragile flame. "Thank you," he said again, and his voice cracked on the second word. She turned away, pretending to adjust the napkin dispenser, because she did not want him to see her reaction. The truth was she had never had anyone look at her like that before, with a mixture of surprise and something almost like reverence, as if he could not believe she existed. To distract herself, she grabbed a cloth and began wiping a nearby table, the familiar rhythm calming her, but each time she moved she felt the weight of his gaze following her. Not in a possessive way, but in a quiet, wondering way, as if he were trying to understand why someone like her would stand beside someone like him when the rest of the world had already walked away. She told herself not to read into it, but her breath still caught in her chest. When her shift finally ended, hours later she stepped into the chilly night exhausted and carrying the scent of coffee and rain on her clothes. Her tiny apartment in the Bronx felt colder than usual when she unlocked the door, the radiator rattling like it was arguing with the idea of warmth. She heated a can of soup, stared at the peeling paint on the kitchen wall, and found her thoughts drifting back to the diner, to the viral energy of the room, to the way Cole had looked when he stepped out of the storm with the entire world against him. She did not know why she remembered the exact tilt of his shoulders, or the way his eyes had briefly closed when she stood in front of him, or the small part of her that wanted to protect him even further, even though her life was complicated enough. She ate dinner in silence, the television humming faintly in the background with another segment about Cole, though she turned away from it, unable to watch strangers dissect him like a case study. She went to her small bedroom, where the single lamp cast a soft glow, and sank onto the bed, hugging her knees to her chest. She had spent years learning how to disappear, how to make herself small in a world that rarely looked her way. But for the first time she had stepped into the light for someone who needed it, and that choice unsettled her more than she could admit. She closed her eyes, but instead of drifting into sleep, she saw again the moment their eyes met across the diner floor. The tightness in his jaw, the faint tremble in his hands, the silent question in his expression asking why she would choose to stand beside him. She wished she had an answer ready, but the truth lay somewhere beneath her ribs. Warm, confusing, and quietly frightening. When sleep finally came, it was thin and restless, and she woke several times to the echo of his voice thanking her. And each time she told herself it meant nothing, that she had simply helped someone who needed help, that she would not see him again, that her life would continue the same way it had before, simple, quiet, and unnoticed. But deep down, she already knew she was lying to herself because something had shifted inside her under the dim lights of the diner, and she felt the world tilting ever so slightly toward something new, something dangerous and something she was not sure she was ready for, but something she could no longer ignore. By the next morning, Elena sensed something was wrong, even before she stepped out of her apartment because her phone would not stop vibrating in her pocket, buzzing with messages from coworkers and acquaintances she barely remembered. And when she finally opened one, the link led to a video of herself standing in front of Cole in the diner, rain dripping from his hair, her voice trembling as she said the words that had changed everything, and the caption read, "The waitress who defended a fallen billionaire." Her stomach tightened as she scrolled through comments because the internet had already taken sides, turning her brief moment of courage into a public spectacle with half the viewers calling her brave and the other half calling her desperate or delusional or hungry for attention. And she realized with a sinking feeling that the world had decided she mattered now, not for who she was, but for what she had done for him. When she arrived at the diner that morning, customers whispered louder than before, staring openly, and the air felt charged with a mix of curiosity, hostility, and something else she could not name. The owner pulled her aside and muttered, "You caused a mess." "Elena, we do not need cameras showing up here," but before she could respond, the bell above the door jingled and the diner fell strangely quiet. Cole Harrington stood outside the glass window staring in as if unsure whether he should enter, and for a long moment he simply stood there, shoulders tense, eyes fixed on her expression with an uncertainty that tugged at her chest. She hesitated, then pushed open the door, letting in the crisp air, and when he saw her his expression softened just enough to reveal the exhaustion beneath. "I did not mean to make things worse for you," he said quietly. But Elena shook her head, unsure what was pulling her toward him. "You did not," she replied, and the truth echoed inside her because she felt something shift again when his eyes held hers. He reached into his coat, pulling out a small envelope sealed neatly, and offered it awkwardly. But before she could take it, he murmured, "It is not money. I know you would not want that." She pushed it back into his hand, refusing even to glance at it, and said, "I do not need anything from you." Something flickered in his eyes. Relief, maybe even admiration. And he slipped the envelope into his pocket, though his gaze lingered on her as though searching for something he could not put into words. Rumors had grown worse overnight, with news commentators debating whether Cole should be removed from the company he built, and whether the accusations of manipulating AI models had merit. The words Helix Dynamics Board of Directors appear on screen everywhere, and Elena overheard a table of customers discussing how the board was planning to force him out before the week ended. She stole a glance at Cole, who stood outside leaning against the brick wall, head bowed as he scrolled through his phone, absorbing the latest blow, and she felt her heart squeeze unexpectedly. Later in the afternoon, when she stepped outside for a break, she found him still there as though he could not bring himself to leave. She approached gently and asked, "Are you waiting for someone?" Cole shook his head, a humorless breath escaping him as he said, "I just did not want to go anywhere I would be recognized." Elena studied him quietly, noticing how he kept his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his shoulders tucked inward, as if bracing himself against a world that had suddenly turned hostile. She wanted to offer something kind, but words followed their own logic around him, rising unexpectedly. "If you need a place to sit, you can come inside," she murmured, but he shook his head again, saying, "I do not want to bring you more trouble." For a moment, neither spoke until he looked up at her, the late afternoon sunlight catching in his eyes, giving them a soft, almost vulnerable glow, and he said, "You are the only person who has looked at me without judgment." The words struck deeper than she expected, her breath catching in her chest because he sounded so raw, so sincere, that she had to look away or else he would see something she was not ready to admit. A faint blush rose on her cheeks and she muttered, "You should get some rest before turning back inside," though her hands trembled where no one could see. That evening the diner was quieter, but the tension lingered and customers still threw occasional glances at her as though expecting her to do something dramatic again. Elena tried to focus on her tasks, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the moment Cole had arrived that afternoon, and the expression in his eyes when he said she was the only person without judgment. When her shift ended, the sun had dipped low, painting the sky in warm orange hues, and she stepped outside to begin her walk to the subway. But the heat rushed to her face when she realized Cole was still there, leaning against the wall, his eyes lifting with something faintly hopeful when he saw her. "You waited," she whispered, more surprised than she meant to sound, and he shrugged slightly. His voice quiet and honest, as he said, "I just wanted to know you were all right." Her pulse quickened in a way she did not want to acknowledge. They walked together for a short distance, not touching, not speaking at first, yet something between them shifted gently like a door opening in silence. Cole stopped at the corner, staring at the street as if searching for courage, then turned toward her and said, "Thank you, Elena, for everything." His voice was soft, but carried a weight that wrapped around her ribs, tightening faintly. She nodded, unable to trust her voice. When they parted, the city noise returned, but she felt its edges blurred, softened by something warm and unfamiliar swirling beneath her skin. That night in her apartment, Elena could not silence the echo of his words, or forget the way he had looked at her under the evening light with a kind of quiet longing that made her heart ache with a possibility she could not yet name. Elena spent most of the next morning pretending she was not checking the news every few minutes, but her attempts at distraction failed because everywhere she turned, Cole Harrington's face appeared on screens accompanied by headlines that grew uglier by the hour. Anonymous sources claimed he had falsified data at Helix Dynamics. Financial analysts insisted he had exaggerated the performance of his AI models, and a panel of commentators laughed openly as they speculated whether he had ever been a genius or merely lucky. Elena watched all of it with a tightening in her chest because she did not understand how the world could turn so confidently cruel on the basis of half-formed whispers, and she kept replaying the look in his eyes when he said no one believed him. She did not know what compelled her to open her laptop and begin digging into the timeline of accusations, the leaked documents, and the sudden coordinated avalanche of press coverage, but once she started, she could not stop. Something about the pattern felt wrong, as if the scandal had been assembled too quickly, too cleanly, too perfectly timed to be organic. She scribbled notes onto a scrap notebook between shifts. Her brows furrowed as she tried to piece together connections, though she had no training in investigation, just a stubborn sense that the truth was hiding beneath all the noise. When her break finally came, she found herself instinctively walking to the only place she thought he might be. Cole was in the same spot as the night before, standing outside the diner, leaning against the wall, like someone who no longer trusted any space to welcome him. His hair was unkempt, and his posture slumped as if he had not slept at all. She hesitated before stepping toward him, her voice soft when she said, "Can I ask you something?" He looked up slowly, and the exhaustion in his eyes made something inside her twist painfully. "Did you do it?" she asked gently. Not accusingly, but with a sincerity that made his throat tighten. He held her gaze for a long moment, then shook his head once clearly and without hesitation. "No," he said, "but I do not expect anyone to believe me anymore." The way he said it broke something in her because it was not defensive or angry, just tired deeply. Tired like a man standing at the edge of a cliff waiting for the ground to crumble beneath him. She nodded, understanding more than she expected, because she had known what it felt like to be dismissed before being heard. Yet the loneliness radiating from him felt sharper, heavier. As the late afternoon faded into evening, they found themselves standing together in silence until Cole spoke, barely audible. "I need some air." Without thinking, Elena followed when he walked around the block and up the metal stairway to the rooftop of his temporary corporate apartment, a place she suspected he had chosen only because it was near enough to Helix that the board could keep their eyes on him. The city stretched before them vast and glowing and far too indifferent to care about the fall of one man. Cole walked toward the railing and wrapped his hands around it, his shoulders drawn tight as if bracing himself against the skyline. His eyes were red-rimmed, not from the wind, but from holding back everything he had refused to let the world see. "I spent 12 years building something I thought would change lives," he said, voice cracking slightly, "and now they want to tear it apart in 12 days. Elena stepped closer, the wind blowing strands of her hair across her face as she took in the sight of him standing alone while the city lights flickered below like careless stars. She could see the tremble in his arms, the shallow rise and fall of his chest, the way he bit the inside of his cheek, trying to keep control. "Cole," she said softly. He did not turn, but she could tell he heard her because his breath hitched. "You do not have to stand alone tonight," she said. Then she reached out and let her fingers gently rest on his arm. The contact was light, but the effect immediate because Cole finally turned, meeting her gaze with eyes full of breaking storms. For a moment neither moved, neither breathed, because the air between them felt unbearably fragile, heavy with unspoken truths, and something deeper that neither dared name. He whispered, "You should not be here in case this spirals onto you." But she shook her head, refusing to step back. "I choose where I stand," she said quietly, and the simplicity of the words made his chest tighten painfully. Before either of them could say another word, Elena glanced down at the street below and noticed a dark sedan lingering near the curb, its headlights dim but unmistakably purposeful. She frowned, leaning slightly over the railing. "Do you know that car?" she asked. Cole stiffened immediately and followed her gaze. "No," he said after a moment, but the unease in his voice was unmistakable. She watched the sedan inch forward before pausing again, and something about the slow, calculated pace made her stomach twist. Maybe it meant nothing. Maybe it meant everything. She filed the sight away in her mind, feeling the first shadow of something larger than a scandal looming at the edges of their lives. As the wind picked up, Cole looked away from the street and back at her, his voice dropping to a raw whisper. "I do not know why you keep helping me." But before he could finish, Elena shook her head, cutting him off. "Because you looked like someone who had been hurt enough," she said, though she did not fully understand why the words burned in her throat, or why she could not bear to see him fall apart. Cole inhaled sharply, as if her kindness struck deeper than the accusations, and for a long moment they simply stood together on the rooftop, the world below them moving on oblivious to the quiet, fragile connection forming in the cold evening air. By the next morning, Elena felt the shift, the way a room feels different after a door slams, because everywhere she turned, people stared with more intensity than before, and her phone was overflowing with notifications she did not want to read. Someone had taken a picture of her standing beside Cole on the rooftop, though the angle hid most details, and a gossip page posted it with the caption, "Billionaire finds comfort in mystery waitress." The comments were worse than before, some mocking, some cruel, some insisting she was chasing fame and money, while others called her naive for involving herself in a scandal that was consuming the city. She tried to ignore it, but the whispers followed her into the diner, where customers glanced at her with amusement or annoyance depending on whether they believed the worst or enjoyed the show. The owner pulled her aside and said, "We have to cut your hours for a while. This is attracting too much attention." His tone was firm, and Elena knew arguing was pointless, so she nodded and returned to the storage room where her vision blurred from frustration and exhaustion. She blinked rapidly, trying to swallow the tightness in her throat, but the moment she thought she had control again, the door creaked open, and Cole stood there filling the small dusty space with an unexpected quiet presence. He froze when he saw the sheen of tears in her eyes, and his voice softened instantly. "Elena," he murmured what happened. She wiped her cheek with the back of her hand, turning slightly away because she hated being seen like this, but he stepped closer, his expression full of concern and guilt. "I never wanted you to pay the price for helping me," he said, his voice low and uneven. She let out a trembling breath, forcing herself to meet his gaze even though her heart clenched painfully. "I have never protected anyone before," she whispered, feeling the truth gather like a knot in her chest. "But you looked like someone who needed it." The words hung in the air, carrying more weight than she intended, and Cole inhaled sharply as if struck by the sincerity in her voice. He did not speak, but something deep in his eyes shifted, a mixture of gratitude, ache, and something that looked dangerously close to vulnerability. Before either of them could say more, the bell at the front of the diner chimed and customers murmured the sound of footsteps approaching, but Cole remained still, watching her with that quiet, steady gaze that made her chest feel tight. She stepped past him, gently needing to breathe again, and returned to the dining area where the tension crackled in the air like static. The city was turning on him faster than anyone expected, and the board of Helix Dynamics was pushing aggressively for his removal. Marcus Vance, a senior board member, had appeared on television that morning speaking carefully about responsibility and integrity, implying without stating that Cole was unfit to lead. Elena knew the tone of that kind of speech, too polished, too rehearsed, and when she watched the clip she felt a prickling unease along her spine. Later that afternoon she stepped outside for a moment of air, only to freeze when she saw a sleek black car parked across the street and Marcus Vance himself stepping out, adjusting his suit jacket as he scanned the block. He should not have been anywhere near the diner. Her pulse quickened as Marcus approached, turned his eyes toward the entrance, and paused when he saw Cole standing inside. Then his gaze slid to Elena, and in that brief moment his expression flickered with recognition. A dangerous narrowing of his eyes that made her stomach drop. "He knows," she realized in a cold flash. "He knows I am around Cole, and he does not like it." Marcus offered Cole a tight smile through the glass, one that hid poison beneath politeness, then stepped away, pulling out his phone as he walked down the street. Elena could not shake the feeling that his appearance was not coincidence. She slipped back inside, unsettled. Cole must have sensed something in her expression because he stepped toward her and asked quietly, "Are you all right?" She nodded, even though uncertainty twisted inside her because she did not want to add to the weight already crushing him. As the afternoon shifted into evening, she found herself watching him more than she intended. Noticing how he rubbed the bridge of his nose whenever he felt overwhelmed, how his breaths came shorter after every new headline, and how he tried to act as though the world collapsing around him was manageable. She saw the dread he tried to hide, and she wondered how many days he had been carrying that weight alone before she stepped in front of him in the diner. The ground between them softened into something almost intimate, without either of them meaning it to, and when she walked him out later, Cole paused at the door as though unsure how to leave her presence. "Thank you for today," he said. And though the words were simple, his tone carried something deeper, something unspoken that made her chest ache. She wished she could take the weight from his shoulders even just for a moment, but the world outside was waiting to tear him apart again. As she watched him walk into the growing dusk, she felt the fragile threads of something forming between them, threads she did not understand yet but could no longer deny, and she knew with startling clarity that despite everything, despite the judgment and the rumors and the fear curling in her stomach, she was not going to walk away from him. Cole did not explain why he wanted Elena to come with him that evening, but something in his voice when he asked carried a quiet desperation she could not ignore. So she followed him through the crowded streets of Midtown toward a towering residential building where a doorman greeted him with a strained mixture of pity and formality. The elevator rose swiftly, the city shrinking below them, and when the doors opened, Elena stepped into a penthouse that felt nothing like she expected. There were no signs of luxury, no glittering displays of wealth, no touches of warmth or personality. Instead, the space was stark, almost clinical, with bare walls, dim lighting, and furniture arranged not for comfort, but for function. It looked less like a home, and more like a place someone stayed only because they had nowhere else to go. Cole walked ahead without turning on the lights, and Elena followed him into the large, open living room, where dusk filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the empty floor. "This does not look like where a billionaire lives," she said quietly, unable to hide her surprise. Cole let out a humorless breath. "I have not had much reason to decorate," he replied. There was something in his tone that suggested he had never allowed himself to settle anywhere, not really. She scanned the room, taking note of the unopened boxes stacked neatly along one wall as if he had planned to move in but stopped halfway. It made her heart tighten unexpectedly. He sat heavily on the sofa, rubbing his forehead with one hand while she moved around the room before finding a laptop and an overflowing folder on the dining table. "You said you needed help," she reminded him gently. "What are we looking for?" He hesitated, then joined her at the table, opening the laptop to a series of files, emails, reports, and financial logs. "The scandal is built on doctored data," he said. Voice tired. "I know it. I just cannot prove it." Elena leaned in closer, scanning the screens and the stacks of printed documents. Her fingers brushed lightly against his as she reached for a page, and the small, accidental touch sent a faint jolt through both of them, but neither pulled away quickly enough. She focused on the timestamp discrepancies in one email, pointing it out. "This was edited," she murmured. "The metadata is wrong." Cole stared at her, surprised. "How did you notice that so fast?" She shrugged self-consciously. "I have worked enough low-level jobs to recognize when someone is covering their tracks. People hide things the same way, whether it is receipts or multi-million-dollar emails." He let out a soft breath that sounded almost like a laugh, and for a moment the heaviness in the penthouse eased. As she continued reading documents, he watched her with quiet intensity. Elena did not move like someone hungry for attention. She moved with purpose, with sincerity, with a calm steadiness that made him wonder how someone who had so little could carry such extraordinary strength. She found another anomaly, and was about to point it out when the elevator chimed. Cole stiffened instantly, his eyes snapping toward the foyer. "That is not anyone who should be here," he whispered. Footsteps approached, and a moment later, Marcus Vance stepped into the living room, removing his coat with excessive politeness. Cole forced himself upright, masking his shock with the strained smile of someone used to performing for powerful men. Marcus offered Cole a patronizing nod before surveying the penthouse. "I thought you might want these files," he said, holding a slim folder, though his gaze quickly shifted to Elena standing beside the table. The pause was brief but sharp enough to slice through the air. "And who might this be?" he asked with an oily smile. Elena felt her pulse spike, but she met his gaze steadily. Cole stepped forward protectively. "She is helping me review documents." Marcus hummed thoughtfully, eyes narrowing slightly as if assessing a threat he had not anticipated. Then his attention drifted to the laptop screen open to the edited email, and his smile sharpened. "Be careful about involving outsiders, Cole. Not everyone has your best interests at heart." And the implication was unmistakable. Elena held his gaze, refusing to flinch, and something cold flickered behind Marcus' expression before he turned and left as abruptly as he had come. The moment the door shut, Cole sank back into the sofa, visibly shaken. "They are taking everything from me," he whispered, voice raw. Elena set the papers down and crossed the room, kneeling in front of him before she had time to second-guess the impulse. Her hands reached for his, automatically cupping his trembling fingers between her own warm, steady hands. "Then, let me fight with you," she said quietly. And even she was surprised by the conviction in her tone. His eyes lifted to hers slowly, and she knew instantly that this moment meant more than either of them was ready to admit. Cole stared at her hands holding his breath catching as if the simple gesture cracked open something he had buried deeply inside. His voice broke when he whispered, "I do not want you getting hurt because of me." She shook her head gently. "I am already in this," she said, and the truth of it echoed through the room. His shoulders trembled as he exhaled a shaking breath, and Elena felt the fragility beneath his usual composure, the weight of being betrayed by everyone except one woman who owed him nothing. They stayed like that for a long moment, hands intertwined, the storm outside forgotten until Cole squeezed her hand softly and whispered, "Thank you, not as a billionaire. Thanking someone for a favor, but as a man desperately grateful to not be alone in the darkest chapter of his life." The next morning, Cole looked even more exhausted than the night before, but there was something steadier in him too. Something that came from knowing Elena was with him as they walked into the corporate headquarters of Helix Dynamics. The glass tower gleamed in the sunlight, a monument to power and ambition. Yet Cole moved through the lobby like a man walking toward an execution. Employees whispered behind their hands when they recognized him, some with pity, some with disdain, and others with curiosity sharp enough to sting. Elena stayed close beside him, her steps quiet but unwavering, even though the marble floors and cold artificial lighting made her feel painfully out of place. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime and they stepped into the top floor where the boardroom waited like a coiled threat. She had imagined rooms like this only through news clips, polished tables, towering windows, and people who believed their decisions shaped entire worlds. But being inside it was different, colder. Marcus Vance stood near the head of the table, speaking to other board members with an easy confidence, as if he already owned the outcome of the meeting. When he turned and saw Elena walking in beside Cole, his smile tightened just slightly enough for her to notice. Cole ignored the stare and pulled out a chair for her, surprising everyone, including Elena. But he did it without hesitation, as if making a statement she deserved a place beside him. The board members exchanged glances, then the meeting began. Marcus launched into a presentation filled with manipulated charts and stern words about responsibility, accountability, and protecting the long-term integrity of Helix Dynamics. His voice was smooth, polished, controlled. Elena watched him closely, and the unease she felt the night before grew sharper. This was a man accustomed to winning battles without appearing to fight at all. When Marcus's speech ended, the room turned to Cole. He stood with the stiff shoulders and tired eyes, but spoke with quiet conviction about the inconsistencies in the accusations, the doctored data, the suspiciously well-timed leaks. Several board members shifted uncomfortably, though none spoke. Marcus clasped his hands behind his back and said calmly, "We appreciate your explanation, Cole. But given the scale of the scandal and your inability to produce evidence, we must consider your removal for the stability of the company." Elena felt the shift like a blade slipping quietly between ribs. Marcus had turned the entire boardroom into a stage where Cole's reputation was already written out as the tragedy everyone anticipated. Cole opened his mouth to respond, but Elena's eyes caught something subtle. A folder partially tucked beneath Marcus's documents, with a red mark on the corner matching one she'd seen in Cole's files the night before. Marcus moved his hand over it, as if hiding it, and Elena's heart thumped hard in her chest. She rose abruptly, her chair scraping softly against the floor as every head turned toward her. "You are condemning him without even looking at the truth," she said, her voice steady, despite the tremor she felt inside. Her words sliced through the room more sharply than she intended, an unacceptable breach of corporate decorum. But she did not care. Marcus turned to her with a slow, calculating smile that felt too practiced. "Miss Rivera," he murmured, restraining his annoyance with thin politeness. "This meeting is for board members only." She met his stare, refusing to back down. Then, "Stop hiding the evidence," she replied, nodding subtly toward the folder beneath his hand. A flicker of alarm crossed his eyes before he masked it, but it was enough for Cole to notice. Several board members leaned forward, murmuring. Marcus let out a quiet, condescending laugh. "The waitress believes she understands corporate governance," he said smoothly. Elena felt a heat rush to her cheeks, but she held her ground. "I do not need to understand corporate governance," she said. "I understand dishonesty." For the first time, Cole looked at her with something far deeper than gratitude, pride mixed with awe, as if she had stepped into the fire not for glory, but simply because she refused to let him burn alone. Marcus studied her expression for a long, tense moment, and the warning in his eyes was unmistakable. It was not a glare of anger, but of recognition. "I see you. I know the threat you pose." Cole stepped forward, placing himself beside her as though forming a silent barrier between her and the boardroom scrutiny. The meeting dissolved into tension with raised voices, quiet arguments, and shifting loyalties, but the outcome had already been shaped behind closed doors long before they walked in. Moments later, the board formally recommended Cole step down pending investigation. The vote was swift, smooth, and merciless. Elena felt Cole's breath hitch beside her, though he kept his expression calm. But she saw his fingers curl slightly at his side, the smallest sign of the devastation he refused to show. As they walked out of the room, Marcus leaned slightly toward Elena, speaking quietly enough that only she and Cole heard. "Stay away from this," he warned. "You have no idea what you're stepping into." Elena met his gaze and said nothing, but the steady defiance in her eyes was answer enough. Cole walked beside her down the long hall, the weight of what had just happened hanging over them like a storm cloud, but when he looked at her his expression softened with something unspoken, something that said her presence kept him from collapsing entirely. And, as they stepped into the elevator, Elena realized she had crossed a line she could never return from. She was no longer just the waitress who defended him. She was becoming the only person still willing to stand beside him when the entire world turned its back. By the time Cole and Elena reached the penthouse again, the city outside had dimmed into a quiet electric glow, the kind of light that made everything look softer. Even the exhaustion carved into Cole's face as he unlocked the door and stepped inside. He looked like a man stripped down to the last threads of his strength. His footsteps slower, his shoulders slightly bowed, and Elena felt something tug deep inside her. Not pity, but a protective ache she did not understand yet, could not ignore. She moved through the dim room, turning on a lamp near the kitchen counter because she could feel how heavy the silence was, and she wanted to anchor him somehow. Cole sank onto the sofa, elbows on his knees, hands clasped as if holding himself together. She asked gently, "Are you hungry?" He shook his head, but she could tell he had not eaten since morning, so she started boiling water anyway, finding noodles in one of the cabinets. It felt strangely intimate, rummaging through a billionaire's kitchen for instant food, but the simplicity calmed her. When she placed the bowl in front of him, he stared at it for a moment, then at her, and something warm flickered through his eyes. "You did not have to do this," he murmured. She sat beside him, not too close, not too far, and answered softly, "You look like you have not breathed properly in days. Eat a little." He obeyed without another word, and when he finished, he leaned back his head, hitting the cushion with a tired exhale. Elena stood to tidy the kitchen, humming quietly, a soft, absent-minded tune her mother used to sing. And when Cole opened his eyes, he watched her with an expression that made her heart stutter. It was not admiration or lust or gratitude alone. It was longing, quiet, deep, and surprised longing. She ignored the heat rising up her neck and wiped down the counter until she felt composed again. When she returned, Cole was still sitting there, but now his eyes were on the window where the city lights shimmered like a distant universe. "Everything they took from me," he said suddenly, voice low. "They think they can erase me like I am a problem on a whiteboard." Elena sat again, and this time she dared to place her hand gently on his forearm. He stiffened in surprise but did not pull away. After a few seconds, his muscles relaxed beneath her touch and he turned his head slightly toward her. "You are not alone," she whispered. The words felt fragile but true. Her hand stayed there and she felt the slow exhale leave his chest, the kind that only happens when someone finally stops pretending to be strong. Hours slipped by quietly as Cole sorted through documents while Elena organized his notes into clearer categories, sometimes brushing his fingers accidentally when they reached for the same page. Each touch, however fleeting, seemed to hold a strange gravity, drawing their breath just slightly uneven before they composed themselves. At some point, exhaustion overtook her, and she drifted asleep on the sofa, curled slightly with a blanket she had found folded on the armrest. Cole noticed long after she had already fallen asleep. He stood there for a good minute unmoving, just watching her soft, rhythmic breathing, and the peacefulness on her face that had been absent since the diner chaos began. He picked up the blanket she had used earlier and pulled it gently over her shoulders, making sure it tucked beneath her arms. Then he sat beside her, eyes lingering on the curve of her cheek, the faint, loose strand of hair brushing her lips, the tiny furrow between her brows that softened as she slept. He lifted his hand for a moment, almost brushing that strand away, but stopped just shy of touching her. Instead, he let his hand hover a breath away, as if closeness alone was enough for now. Outside the penthouse, the city hummed low against the windows, but inside the room felt suspended like a pocket of quiet carved only for them. Cole did not know how long he sat there simply breathing in the calm she brought with her, but when he finally stood he caught something on the floor near the front door. Footprints. Not his, not hers. Wet marks, faint, but clearly recent, trailing toward the hallway. He moved closer, his breath catching when he noticed the penthouse's security panel blinking red as if someone had tampered with it. The cameras had been disabled. A chill crawled up his spine and he instinctively looked back toward Elena, sleeping soundly unaware of the possible danger. He quietly checked each room, but no one remained inside. Whoever it was had come and gone, leaving no trace except that subtle message. Someone was watching. Someone was ready to move. Elena stirred slightly in her sleep, murmuring something unintelligible, and Cole hurried back to her kneeling beside the sofa. The idea of her being endangered, a woman who had given him nothing but loyalty, terrified him more than anything happening to himself. He stayed by her side until she settled again, then sat on the floor beside the sofa, leaning back against it, his arm almost touching hers as if his presence alone might shield her. When she woke, hours later still drowsy, she found Cole seated close watching her with an expression both gentle and unreadable. She sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes, embarrassed, but he shook his head softly. "You should sleep more," he whispered. She smiled faintly before noticing how close he was, and the warmth between them shifted into something deeper, heavier, warmer than before. Her gaze dropped instinctively to his hand resting near hers, and she hesitated, then touched it lightly with her fingertips, a quiet, silent reassurance. He turned his palm upward, and without thinking, she intertwined her fingers with his. They stayed like that, foreheads almost touching both, breathing the same slow, quiet rhythm as if neither wanted to break whatever had formed between them. They did not speak. They did not need to. Something was growing in the quiet, something fragile and powerful, and neither of them dared to name it yet. The morning light seeped through the tall windows in pale gold streaks when Elena woke fully, this time still curled on the sofa, but now with Cole asleep near her, his head tipped back against the cushion, his hand still loosely intertwined with hers, as if even in sleep he refused to let go of the one anchor left in his collapsing world. For a brief, suspended moment she watched him breathe steady and unguarded, and she felt an ache she did not dare name bloom quietly inside her chest. She slipped her hand away gently, standing to stretch when something sharp in the corner of her eye caught her attention. A panel on the wall near the hallway was cracked open just slightly, barely noticeable unless someone was looking closely. She moved toward it and crouched. The seal around the panel was bent as if forced open. Her stomach tightened. Someone had been here last night long enough to tamper with the security system. She swallowed hard and turned to see Cole slowly blinking awake. She forced a calm tone. "Did you see this?" He rose instantly, all traces of sleep vanishing, replaced by alertness. "I noticed someone disabled the cameras yesterday," he said. "I checked the rooms, but whoever it was left." Elena took a step closer to him, her voice low. "They are not just trying to ruin you professionally, Cole. They are trying to scare you or destroy something in here." Cole rubbed a tired hand across his face, then crossed the room, headed toward the storage closet near his office. "There is something I never told the board," he murmured. "Something I did not trust anyone with, except, maybe, I did not want to trust anyone with it until now." He pulled down a worn cardboard box from the top shelf. It looked ordinary, but the way he held it with both hands revealed its importance. Elena's pulse quickened. "What is that?" Cole set it on the table, opening it slowly. Inside was a small external hard drive wrapped in an old cloth. "I kept a backup of early prototype files from when I started Helix," he said quietly. "Files that prove Marcus had been negotiating deals behind the board's back with a medical conglomerate. They wanted exclusive tech rights, and Marcus promised them in exchange for a private stake." Elena's breath caught as she stared at the drive. "Does anyone else know this exists?" Cole shook his head. "No, not even my legal team. I only made this because something in my gut told me I might need it one day." Elena reached out, taking the hard drive carefully. It was surprisingly light for something that could shift the entire direction of a billion-dollar scandal. She plugged it into the laptop and waited as it loaded. Within seconds, dozens of audio files, folders, and message logs flooded the screen. One particular file was labeled M. Vance, Private Recording. Elena clicked it without hesitating. Marcus's voice filled the speaker's cold, casual calculating. If Harrington resists, we'll leak the financial discrepancies. By the time he figures out what happened, his reputation will be ruined, and the acquisition will be ours. Elena's eyes widened. This is it, Cole. This is proof. Cole stared at the screen, breathless. But before relief could settle, a loud, sharp electronic beep sounded from the penthouse security panel. Elena jumped. What was that? Cole moved quickly to the wall where the panel flashed red. Unauthorized entry attempt. Someone was trying to override the new code. Elena felt a jolt of fear. They know the evidence is here. She grabbed the laptop and the hard drive. We cannot stay out in the open. Panic room, Cole said, guiding her down the hallway. It was a narrow steel, reinforced room with a thick door and a manual lock. As soon as they entered, Elena set the laptop on the small table inside, her hands trembling slightly as she connected to the building's broadband through the emergency uplink. I am sending the files to cloud storage, she said. Cole's jaw flexed. Send copies to places Marcus cannot touch. She typed, quickly bypassing firewalls using instinct rather than formal training, sending one copy to a major investigative journalist, another to an anonymous whistleblower account, and a final one to the general inquiry portal of the FBI. From the hallway outside came the sound of a heavy thud, followed by a scraping metallic noise like someone trying to pry open a door. Elena's breath hitched. They are trying to break in. The laptop dinged softly. Upload 70%. Hurry, she whispered. Cole placed his hands on both her arms, steadying her. Look at me, Elena. You are safe. I am here. The words mirrored what she once told him, and for a moment she felt a surge of courage rush through her. The scraping outside grew louder, accompanied by muffled voices. Hurry, she urged again, her pulse roaring in her ears as the upload bar crawled to 85, then 90, then 98. Finally, the final bar filled, and the message "Upload complete" flashed on the screen. Elena exhaled shakily. It is done. Cole released a breath as if a weight had shifted off him for the first time in weeks. He looked at her not with relief alone, but with something deeper, fierce, and protective, the realization of what she had risked for him. The pounding outside stopped, replaced by hurried footsteps retreating down the hallway. Whoever they were, they had realized it was too late. Elena collapsed into the small chair, trembling with delayed fear and adrenaline. Cole sank beside her, his knees brushing hers. You just saved my life, he whispered, voice thick with emotion. No, she said softly, meeting his gaze. I saved the truth. Cole stared at her for a long moment, eyes dark with something she felt all the way down to her ribs, something unspoken but unmistakably real. Then he reached for her hand, his fingers closing slowly around hers with a tenderness that made her breath catch. Outside, sirens began to echo faintly, growing louder as they neared the tower. Elena looked toward the door, then back at Cole, realizing this was the moment everything would change, not just for him, but for them both, because now the world would know what she had done, and the fight was only beginning. The sirens grew louder until the sound filled the penthouse like an approaching storm, and Elena felt each vibration pulse through the floor beneath her feet as she and Cole stepped cautiously out of the panic room. The hallway outside was empty now, eerily still, as if whoever had been trying to break in had evaporated the moment they realized the evidence was already gone. Cole moved ahead, checking corners with careful measured breaths while Elena stayed close behind, gripping the laptop tightly against her chest. When they reached the living room, the blinding strobe of red and blue lights flashed through the windows, painting the bare walls in frantic color. Then came the pounding on the front door, followed by a commanding voice. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Mr. Cole Harrington, we have a warrant to enter. Cole exchanged a brief glance with Elena before unlocking the door. The moment it swung open, agents flooded inside, sweeping through the penthouse with swift tactical precision, checking rooms, checking windows, checking every corner. Elena instinctively stepped back, overwhelmed by the sudden rush of authority uniforms, radios clipped to shoulders, and the rigid energy of people trained for high-stakes emergencies. One agent in particular stopped right in front of her, a tall woman with sharp eyes that flicked instantly to the laptop in Elena's hands. "You," the agent said, turning fully toward her, "are the one who submitted the evidence." Elena swallowed hard, her throat suddenly tight. "Yes, I sent it. Through the emergency portal." The agent studied her for a long beat before nodding as though confirming something with herself. Then she said a sentence Elena would remember for the rest of her life. "We have never seen a waitress break a billion-dollar conspiracy before." The room seemed to freeze for a moment, the words hanging in the air with an almost surreal clarity. Cole stared at her with disbelief mixed with awe, a stunned silence filling the space between them. Elena felt heat rise to her cheeks as the weight of what she had done finally hit her. The agent softened slightly, her tone shifting. "You did the right thing. Your actions protected national-level tech infrastructure and prevented a major illegal acquisition." Elena blinked rapidly, trying to absorb the magnitude of those words. She had only wanted to protect Cole, to stop something wrong from destroying him, and somehow her instinct had detonated a much larger truth. Another agent approached Cole holding a copy of the digital files. "Mr. Harrington, these recordings directly implicate Marcus Vance and representatives of Kessler Medical in coordinated fraud and corporate espionage. We are taking Marcus into federal custody." Cole released a slow, shaky breath, and for the first time in weeks, something like real hope flickered across his face. "Where is he now?" he asked, voice unsteady. "Being processed at our Manhattan field office. We expect additional arrests by tonight." Elena felt her chest swell with relief, but before she could exhale fully, agents began moving through the penthouse, gathering evidence, asking questions, photographing the forced security panel. One paused beside the broken panel. Whoever tampered with this knew what they were doing, the agent said. They were inside for less than a minute. Elena's stomach tightened. "To destroy the hard drive," she murmured. The agent nodded. "Most likely." As questions continued, Cole stood beside Elena, his shoulder brushing hers just barely. But the small contact grounded both of them. When the agents finished sweeping the penthouse, the lead agent turned to them. "You two will need to come to the field office for statements. You are both primary witnesses." Elena's stomach flipped nervously, but she nodded. Cole glanced at her, instantly reading her fear. "I will be right there with you," he whispered. She looked up at him and found the reassurance she needed in his eyes. At the FBI office, the hours blurred into structured questions, bright lights, and the cold hum of a recording device. Elena told them everything she knew, how she spotted the timestamp discrepancies, how she found the hard drive, how someone tried to break into the penthouse minutes before the upload completed. Throughout her testimony, Cole sat beside her silent but unwavering, his hand often brushing against hers beneath the table, a quiet tether that kept her steady. When Cole gave his statement, Elena watched him closely. She saw the strength in him returning piece by piece as he recounted the sabotage, the manipulation, the moments he doubted everything except her. The agents listened with unwavering attention, and when he finished, the room was heavy with the unspoken acknowledgement that his life had been weaponized against him by the very people he trusted. Hours later, when they were finally released into the cool night air outside the Manhattan field office, Elena exhaled a breath she had been holding since morning. Reporters stood behind barricades shouting questions, camera flashes popping like firecrackers, but agents escorted them through the side exit, minimizing the chaos. Once they stepped onto a quieter street, Cole stopped, turned to her, and said in a voice thick with emotion, "Elena, you saved me." She shook her head immediately, emotion tightening her throat. "I saved the truth, Cole. You would have done the same for anyone." "No," he whispered, stepping closer, "not for anyone. Just for you." The sincerity in his eyes made her heart thump painfully, and she had to pull her gaze away for a moment because she was not ready for the weight of what was forming between them. A black SUV pulled up sudden and sleek. An agent opened the back door for them, offering a soft, "We will get you both home safely." As they climbed inside, Elena realized her hands were still trembling, and before she could hide them, Cole reached over and gently laced his fingers through hers, grounding her again without a word. She looked at their joined hands, then at him, and the smallest, fragile smile tugged at her lips. The city lights passed in blurred streaks outside the window, but inside the car, everything felt still suspended, the adrenaline fading into something warm and quiet, something new. By the time they reached the penthouse, Elena realized the truth she had been ignoring since the day she first stepped in front of him at the diner. Protecting him had changed everything, and now nothing between them would ever be the same. The sun was just beginning to rise when Cole and Elena finally stepped back into the penthouse, the soft early light spreading across the floor like a quiet promise that the worst of the storm had finally broken. The space still felt hollow, but for the first time since she had entered it, Elena sensed something different in the air. A subtle shift, like the weight pressing down on Cole's shoulders, had lifted just enough for him to breathe again. He closed the door behind them, leaning against it for a moment as if gathering himself. Elena watched him in the silence that followed, noticing how tired he was and yet how alive he looked in a way she had not seen before, as if hope itself was pulsing beneath his skin. "You should sleep," she whispered. He shook his head gently. "I would rather talk for a moment if that is all right." She nodded, and they walked to the window, where the city shimmered softly below them. Cole's reflection in the glass looked strangely vulnerable, a man rebuilding himself from ash and truth. They stood side by side for a moment, not touching, but close enough that she felt the warmth radiating from him. "I keep thinking about everything that has happened these past weeks," he said softly, his voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who had clawed his way out of a very deep hole. Everything collapsed so fast. My reputation, my career, my company. And yet, through all of it, the only thing I could focus on was you standing in front of me in that diner. Elena felt something tighten inside her chest, a twisted blend of shyness and longing. She kept her gaze on the city. "Anyone would have helped," she whispered, though even as she said it, she knew it was not true. Cole turned his head, slightly studying her profile, his voice softer than the morning light around them. "No, Elena, they did not. You did." She inhaled slowly, letting the truth settle between them. He stepped a little closer, not crowding her, just enough that she could feel the gentle brush of his sleeve against hers, and it sent a tremor down her spine. "When I was in that boardroom yesterday," Cole said, his voice raw, "when they voted to remove me, I thought that was the moment that would break me. But then you stood up. You stood up for me when no one else dared." Lena felt her breath catch. She had replayed that moment too many times to admit the shock on everyone's faces, the cold warning in Marcus's eyes, the way Cole had looked at her as if she had done something impossible. "I could not stay quiet," she whispered. "I saw what they were doing to you." He nodded slowly, his gaze dropping to the floor for a moment before lifting again, filled with something deeper. "When the FBI said you broke a billion-dollar conspiracy, I felt proud in a way I have never felt before, not because of what it meant for me, but because it meant the world finally saw the strength I always knew was in you." Her heart thudded hard against her ribs. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. The room felt warmer, suddenly smaller, like the world outside could not intrude for a few stolen minutes. Cole exhaled shakily, running a hand through his hair. "Helix invited me back this morning. Full reinstatement. Control of the board. A public apology." She blinked, surprised. "That is good news, is it not?" Cole shook his head. "It does not matter to me anymore. Not like it used to. For a long time, this company was everything. My identity, my worth, my entire life. But standing in that FBI office, watching you speak truth without fear, I realized something." He turned fully toward her. "I do not want my life to be built on people who will abandon me the moment things get difficult. I want it built on what I saw in you." Elena's breath trembled. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Cole stepped closer, now, truly close, just inches between them. "I am starting something new," he murmured. "A foundation dedicated to ethical tech and community development. Harrington Center for Ethical Tech. And I want you to help run it." Her eyes widened. "Cole, I am not a corporate person. I have never had a position like that. You saved my life," he said simply. "You saw the truth when no one else did. You understand people. You understand integrity. That is more valuable than any degree." She looked down, overwhelmed. Cole reached out slowly, hesitantly, and with the gentlest motion touched her chin, lifting it just enough for her to meet his gaze. His fingers barely brushed her skin, but it felt like fire, soft, warm, startling. "Elena," he whispered, "you are the only part of these past months that reminds me of who I want to be." Her breath hitched as he traced his thumb lightly along her cheekbone, the touch unbearably tender. She had never been touched like that before, like she was something precious and breakable. Cole leaned in a little closer, his forehead almost touching hers, their breaths mixing in a quiet, trembling rhythm. "You are not the man they tried to destroy," she whispered, voice trembling. "You are the man I saw that night, the man who walked into a diner broken but still trying to stand, the man who said thank you with a voice full of so much pain and so much hope." Cole closed his eyes briefly, overwhelmed, then opened them again with a softness she had never seen. "Elena," he breathed. She felt her heart pull toward him like a tide she could no longer fight, and when she leaned in just an inch, he met her halfway, resting his forehead gently against hers. They stood like that, suspended in the golden morning glow. Two people breathing each other's air, sharing a moment that felt more intimate than a kiss. A moment that said everything they were not ready to say out loud. Outside, the city stirred, but inside the penthouse there was only the quiet heartbeat of something beginning. Something fragile, something real, something earned in fire and fear and truth. When Elena finally whispered Cole his name, trembled between them like a promise, and he answered with a soft, almost breaking yes, as if he had been waiting for her to call him back to himself. They did not move apart. They simply stayed there together, letting the moment settle into their bones, letting the warmth of it fill the empty spaces the world had carved into them both until the future no longer felt terrifying. It felt like something they might actually build together. 1 year later, New York felt different, not because the city had changed, but because Elena Rivera walked through it, no longer invisible, no longer shrinking herself to fit into corners of the world that never made space for her. Instead, she moved with a quiet, steady confidence shaped by everything she had survived and everything she had chosen, including the man walking beside her every morning with a gentle warmth that never faded. The Harrington Center for Ethical Tech stood in the Bronx, where abandoned warehouses once cast long shadows over forgotten streets. Now, sunlight bounced off tall windows and fresh-painted murals lined the exterior depicting community stories, resilience, and the unmistakable silhouette of a woman shielding another figure from a storm. Elena blushed every time she saw it, though Cole insisted the artist had captured the moment exactly as it happened that night in the diner. Inside the center, people bustled with purpose engineers, volunteers, teens from the neighborhood learning coding for the first time, mothers researching resources workers preparing for a community tech fair. Elena stepped through the lobby, and dozens of familiar faces greeted her with warm nods and fond smiles. "Morning, Miss Rivera." "Morning, Elena. Thank you for the workshop yesterday. You changed my son's life." She tried never to let the compliments settle into arrogance, but she let them into her heart because each one was a reminder that she mattered here, that her choices had ripples bigger than she ever imagined. Cole entered a few minutes later, dressed simply, his once immaculate billionaire image replaced by someone who looked freer, lighter, and deeply human. The moment he saw her, his entire expression softened in a way that still caught her breath. "Ready for today?" he asked quietly, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. She smiled at the familiar gesture, "As ready as I will ever be." They stepped onto the small stage built inside the community hall, where rows of chairs spread out filled with people journalists, volunteers, city council members, and families from every corner of the Bronx. Today marked the official grand opening of the Harrington Center, though its work had already begun months earlier, influencing legislation advocating for ethical tech access and offering job training to people who once felt locked out of opportunity. Cole walked to the microphone and the room hushed instantly. "Thank you all for being here," he began, voice strong but warm. "A year ago, my life was falling apart. I lost my company, my reputation, and the world believed I was a monster." He paused, letting the truth settle. "But one person saw me. One person stood in front of me when no one else would." Cameras clicked, but Cole's eyes never left Elena's. She felt the world narrow to a pinpoint of warmth and pressure in her chest. He continued, "Today, every program, every life. This center touches every job created, every young person given a chance to build something better is because of her. Because a waitress with no power, no protection, and every reason to walk away chose instead to stand between me and a world that wanted to destroy me." The crowd stirred quiet murmurs of admiration rippling through the hall. Cole stepped aside from the microphone, then looked at Elena, offering his hand. She took it, moving to the podium, her palms slightly sweaty. Public speaking had never been her strength, but she had learned courage the hard way, and it lived in her bones now. "Thank you," she began softly. "I am here today because I made one choice. I chose not to look away. I chose to see someone who was hurting even when everyone else saw someone to blame. I did not save a billionaire. I saved a human being who needed help, and in return, he helped me find a purpose I never knew I had." Her voice steadied as she continued. "I grew up thinking people like me were meant to survive quietly in the corners of the city, but now I know that the smallest act of courage can change the biggest story. If you have ever felt invisible, I promise you, you are not." The applause rose, warm and genuine, vibrating through the room. Cole stepped forward again, unable to stop himself from taking her hand with both of his. No titles, no roles, just two people standing together before a crowd that now understood. He whispered softly so only she could hear, "You changed my entire life, Elena. You saved it." She squeezed his hands back, her eyes shining. "And you gave me a new one." After the event, the two walked outside into the late afternoon sun, where children ran around chalk drawings on the sidewalk and volunteers handed out flyers for the next tech mentorship program. Families smiled at Elena, thanking her, shaking her hand, hugging her. Cole stood behind her the whole time, his presence a quiet shield and a quiet devotion. When the crowd thinned, Cole led her toward a small park a few steps away. There, beneath the branches of an old elm tree, he stopped, turning her gently toward him. The city noise faded, replaced by the rustle of leaves and the soft echo of distant laughter. "Elena," he said her name like it was something precious. She lifted her eyes to his heart, drumming softly in her chest. "I used to think my life needed rebuilding from the ground up," he murmured, "but now I know it just needed you." Her breath trembled. He reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers. "You stood up when no one else did. You believed in me when I could not believe in myself, and every day since you have shown me what a life with purpose looks like." She felt tears prick her eyes, but they were warm, not painful. He lifted her hand, bringing it to his lips in a soft, reverent kiss. "I love you, Elena." The words settled over her like sunlight, gentle and certain, and she closed her eyes, breathing them in. When she opened them, she whispered back, her voice steady, "I love you too, Cole." They leaned into each other, a soft embrace that felt like the ending of one story and the beginning of another, the kind built on choice, trust, and a love that grew slowly, quietly, and unshakably from the ashes of chaos. And as they stood there beneath the elm tree, hand in hand, Elena realized something profound. She had not only protected him, he had protected her. He had given her a world where she finally felt seen. And now they would face whatever came next, not billionaire and waitress, not scandal and salvation, but two souls who chose each other in the moment the world turned its back. If you are still here listening to this story, then maybe something in Elena and Cole's journey touched a corner of your heart the way it touched mine. Because sometimes all it takes is one person refusing to walk away to change the entire course of someone's life. Maybe you have been that person, the one who offered kindness when it cost you something. Or maybe you were the one standing in the rain hoping anyone would see you through the storm. If their story reminded you that courage does not always roar, that it sometimes speaks softly in whispered promises and quiet choices, then take a moment right now to let me know you are here. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from, whether it is a warm kitchen in Texas, a small apartment in New York, a quiet bedroom in Georgia, or somewhere halfway across the world. I read every single comment, and hearing your stories, your reflections, your thoughts, it keeps this channel alive and reminds me why we share these moments together. And if Elena's bravery made you think about a time you protected someone, or someone protected you, I would love to hear that too. Your stories matter. They help someone else feel less alone. If you felt your heart ache when Cole finally breathed again, or when Elena stood up in that boardroom, or when she whispered, "I will not walk away." If you felt even one moment where you thought, yes, this is what love should feel like, then please give this video a like, so YouTube knows to show it to more people who crave the same emotional journeys you do. And if you want to stay with me for more stories of healing, of choosing love, even when the world turns cold, of ordinary people changing extraordinary lives, make sure you subscribe and turn on the notifications. We are building something beautiful here, a community of people who believe in kindness and courage and second chances. Before you go, I want to leave you with a question. If you were Elena standing in that diner watching the world turn its back on someone, would you have stepped in? Or if you were Cole alone in the rain, would you have believed anyone could still stand beside you? Tell me below which one you felt closest to tonight. And one last thing, if this story found its way to you on a difficult day, I hope it reminded you that storms eventually break, that even when everything falls apart, someone somewhere might be waiting to stand with you, and sometimes that person ends up being the one you never expected. Thank you for choosing this channel. Thank you for sharing this moment with me. And until the next story, remember this: even when the world turns its back, love has a way of stepping forward.